Hey heroes, and welcome to another incredible episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelate. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. Previously on the channel, we've talked about the origins of vampires in the Marvel Universe, and how their creation was the direct result of writings left behind by the elder god Chthon. These writings, the Chthon Scrolls, were eventually collected and bound into a single volume, the Darkhold. You can refer to that vampire video for more details there and the full story of Chthon's origins, because once again, this week's tale begins with him. In the distant past, the Earth's elder gods watched as natural organic life slowly evolved. As mankind's predecessors emerged, Chthon saw these new creatures as little more than test subjects that he could use in mystic genetic experiments. This resulted in the creation of several elder races, or Elderspawn, like the Nagarai, a demonic race who we've mentioned numerous times on the channel before. But the child of Chthon most relevant to today's topic is Varcolac, the ancient wolf demon god. It was he who spawned the original wolfmen, lupine bipeds who were capable of taking human form. The predecessors of modern werewolves, the descendants of Varcolac, were capable of infecting humans through bites or scratches, transforming their victims into wolfmen. The wolfmen also warred with other elder races, including fellow creations of Chthon like the Harpies and Ape-men, as well as the Serpent-Men, who were descended from Chthon's brother Set. More specifically, the Serpent-Men were the children of Sliggith, one of the 7 spawns of Set. A side note, I actually talked more about another of Set's children, the Dragon of the Moon, in my video about Drax the Destroyer's daughter, Moondragon. So if you're new to the channel, check out the description for more links to tangentially relevant topics like that one. Speaking of tangentially relevant, another Set spawn I want to mention is the primeval sea god Fortis, also known as the legendary Old Man of the Sea. Fortis mated with another monstrous sea creature, Ceto, and the two produced a number of other infamous races, including the Sirens and Gorgons of Greek myth. But more relevant for today is their daughter, the snake woman Echidna. Echidna mated with the wolf demon Varcolac and had a daughter, the giantess Angerboda, who became a sorcerer in the realm of Jotunheim. While Angerboda was of no interest to her father, her monstrous heritage became evident in her own children, which were sired by the god of mischief, Loki. There was Jormungand, the Midgard serpent, who resembled Echidna's side of the family, and the Fenris wolf, who obviously took more after its grandfather, Varcolac. But back to the topic at hand, there was a time when the wolfmen were the most infamous of the Elderspawn, as the whole world was held in terror by Varcolac and the 3 other wolf lords. Among them was Garmr, a monstrous hellhound with an insatiable appetite. His son, Garm, became the guardian of the Asgardian Hell, which was ruled by another child of Loki and Angerboda, the death goddess Hela. Well, technically Hela was adopted, but that's a whole other complicated story. Another wolf lord was the bloodhound Lycaon, who had a twisted sense of humor and, by some accounts, was eventually slain by Hercules. Finally, there was Goeco, the night beast, first of the Wolven warlocks who earned his name from the mystic darkness that followed him. Of course, the most feared among the wolf lords was Varcolac himself, who earned his reputation as a relentlessly merciless hunter. However, as humanity rose to prominence, the elder races began to lose ground. By the year 20,000 BC, most of the Elderspawn were either slaughtered by mankind or driven into hiding. Surviving wolfmen occasionally resurfaced and notably had several clashes with the warrior king of Valusia, Kull. Because of this, their race is commonly referred to as the Wolfmen of Valusia. During this time, the wolfmen were already nearly extinct, and many more perished in the Great Cataclysm circa 18,000 BC. Now, the Great Cataclysm is something we've addressed multiple times on the channel, so check out one or more videos in the description for all of the details. Something else we've talked about in a previous video is the origin of the Savage Land, a hidden jungle nestled in the Antarctic and populated by prehistoric animals. While this ancient nature preserve was created by an alien race called the New Wali, the ones who commissioned them to do so were the powerful extra-dimensional entities known as Beyonders. And another race we need to mention are the Fortisquians, a species that was created by the Beyonders via genetic engineering. The Fortisquians were initially designed to be colonists and started by populating the Arcturus star system where they were created. On the planet Arcturus IV, the Fortisquians established a civilization based around genetic engineering, controlling their population to the point where natural-born children were killed in infancy. Back on Earth, after the Great Cataclysm caused a global flood that damaged the environmental systems which regulated the Savage Land's climate, the Beyonders sent a group of Fortisquian gene lords from Arcturus IV to repair them. The exact timeline of events is dubious, but the Fortisquian comet ship supposedly crashed on Earth sometime around 8000 BC. 3 gene lords, Kamar, Ular, and Zoltar, survived the crash and went about repairing the Savage Land's machines as instructed. Meanwhile, back on Arcturus IV, their eugenic society fell into chaos as various factions formed and went to war with one another. When the 3 Fortisquians on Earth used a teleportation warp in the Savage Land to return to Arcturus, they found their home in ruins. And so they decided to turn back, locating a return warp that brought them back to Earth, where they passed some rudimentary knowledge onto the primitive denizens of the Savage Land. Regarding themselves as mankind's caretakers, they left their lab in the Savage Land and traveled the world seeking ways to enhance humanity. To this end, they decided to combine Arcturan science with Earth-born sorcery in an attempt to create a superior race of men. In one of these experiments, they captured and experimented on a wild wolf named Wind Racer. Using magic derived from the wolf demon Varcolac, Wind Racer's spirit was bound to a humanoid form along with her DNA. The resulting hybrid, Greysire, would become known as the first modern werewolf. Much like his predecessors, the wolfmen of Valusia, Greysire passed on the curse of lycanthropy through bites and scratches. While appearing human by day, most of this new breed had the ability to assume a 4-legged wolf form resembling the actual animal, as well as a bipedal humanoid shape with lupine features. They also possessed considerable regenerative powers and commonly ceased to show signs of aging after reaching maturity. Initially, these werewolves lived peacefully and were known as brethren to normal wolves. However, things began to change as mankind fell out of harmony with their primal selves, and what was once considered a gift passed down by the elder gods instead became a curse. Still connected to them through the magic that created them, Varcolac sometimes influenced their wolf forms, driving them feral and darkening their reputation. Furthermore, the Egyptian moon god Khonshu sought to make use of the werewolves. It was he who bound them to the lunar cycle, causing them to lose control of themselves when the moon was at its fullest. For most werewolves, this meant that every month for 3 nights they would transform and enter into a berserker rage, attacking indiscriminately. To keep them in line, Khonshu armed his human followers with silver weapons, which the werewolves were vulnerable to. Centuries passed, and the werewolf curse was passed down through the generations, both hereditarily and through infection. Those afflicted began to hide among regular humans, most of which only transformed on those fateful moonlit nights. For centuries, they primarily lived in the European countryside and were known by different names to different cultures. Notably in Romanian, they were known as Varcolac, after the original wolf god. While they remained elusive for many centuries, there have been confirmed sightings dating back to the 1500s when a werewolf known as the Silver One was slain by the Puritan adventurer Solomon Kane. There are also stories from this era in which individuals contracted a lycanthropy through unconventional means. For example, a man named Peter Snub allegedly transformed after receiving a wolf skin belt from Satan himself. He terrorized the German countryside before he was killed and beheaded, although the magical belt was never actually found. In the 1700s, the werewolf population of North America began increasing as more traveled there among the European settlers. Some who embraced their wolven side established a council of werewolves to watch over their kind and looked down on those who renounced their heritage or consorted with humans. Others passed themselves off as normal wolves to avoid drawing attention to themselves. For example, in 1954, an old blind werewolf named Albert Winter ironically posed as a seeing eye dog and formed a partnership with a sighted human. Albert relied on his partner's vision, and the two protected each other from would-be attackers in the dead of night. Now, there are more documented examples of werewolf attacks than we have time to delve into today, so for the next part of our story, we're going to focus on a specific lineage, the Russoff family. Now, I will note that due to the nature of the sliding timeline, contradictory plot points, and good old-fashioned retcons, there are a variety of conflicting stories regarding the Russoff family history and lineage, not helped by the men often having near-identical names as their forefathers. What follows is my best attempt to construct a cohesive timeline, largely relying on official handbooks to reconcile the inconsistencies. Unconfirmed reports of lycanthropy in this family line date back as far as the 2nd century, when a werewolf allegedly passed the curse on to its children, only for it to remain dormant in subsequent generations. One such descendant was a Hungarian nobleman named Baron Grigory Russoff, who lived in the late 18th century. He was one of several nobles who encroached onto the territory of the notorious vampire lord Count Dracula after he relocated to France in 1762. Dracula returned in 1795, but Russoff, as the most powerful of the interlopers, refused to kneel to him, and as a result the vampire lord murdered the baron's wife, Louisa. Swearing vengeance, Russoff succeeded in infiltrating Dracula's castle during daylight hours and drove a wooden stake through the vampire's heart. He then lined the coffin with garlic and tossed it into the river with Dracula still inside, and while this didn't kill him, it did put him out of commission for about a decade. Still unsatisfied and filled with grief-fueled rage, the Baron turned his anger on Dracula's worldly possessions. However, as he smashed his way through the castle, he heard the muffled cry of an imprisoned woman coming from a nearby room. Upon investigating, he found the source of the sound, Lydia Varadi, who claimed that Dracula had killed her parents and was keeping her there to feed on. Russoff freed Lydia, but as night fell and the two stepped outside, he realized the real reason she was being held. You see, while Dracula could command creatures of the night, like bats and wolves, werewolves were immune to his control. Transforming under the light of the full moon, Lydia Varadi attacked Grigory Russoff, passing the werewolf's curse on to him. These events were all documented in Grigory's diary, which he kept to pass on to his children. While he loathed his own subsequent transformations, Baron Russoff later remarried, taking a woman named Christina as his second wife. He was eventually killed by a mob of local villagers, but it seems the family curse was fated to be passed on to his descendants. For example, in 1909, a werewolf named Claudia Russell was responsible for a series of brutal killings in New York. She was ultimately killed and dissected by Mr. Sinister, but I already talked about that story in my video on Sabretooth. For most members of the Russoff line, the curse remained dormant, but then in the 1920s, Baron Gregor Russoff obtained the Darkhold from an aging sorcerer named Taboo. There are conflicting reports regarding how this happened, with one source claiming that Taboo sold the book without realizing what he had, while another indicates that Russoff obtained the book by force. Sometime prior to this, the book's indestructible pages had been separated into individual scrolls, but Gregor Russoff bound them together once again, restoring the Darkhold. His motives for doing so are unclear, but it should probably be noted that Baron Gregor Russoff's transient estate included Mount Wundagore. You may recall from other videos that in the 6th century, the sorceress Morgan Le Fay tried to use the book to summon its author, Chthon, but failed to control the elder god and were forced to bind a fragment of his spirit within Mount Wundagore itself. In any event, by studying the ancient spells under the light of the full moon, the Baron inadvertently activated his dormant lupine gene. Before long, he grew obsessed with undoing this and financed his research by selling some of his land to a scientist named Jonathan Drew, who shared it with his business partner Herbert Wyndham in 1930. In March of 1931, when Russoff transformed again, he attacked and killed Jonathan Drew's wife, Miriam. It was Wyndham who found her body and caught a glimpse of the monster in the moonlight, although he didn't tell Jonathan what he saw. Suffice it to say, there was a lot happening on Mount Wendigore at the time, much of which we've discussed in more detail elsewhere. Wyndham was in the midst of building an advanced citadel of science designed by the German astrophysicist Matthew Horace Grabscheid, the father of the 1950s Marvel Boy. To complete this project, he employed the subservient underground race called Moloids, which were shown to him by the rogue Inhuman Phaeder. Fearing that the Moloids would be blamed for killing Miriam, Wyndham hid the cause of her death and claimed that it was an accident. With his wife gone and his daughter having been placed in suspended animation after falling victim to radiation poisoning, Drew ultimately left the Citadel. Wyndham meanwhile had a more direct encounter with the werewolf, narrowly surviving when the rising sun drove the beast off. He then fashioned a suit of armor to use in their next confrontation, and while not superstitious by nature, Wyndham covered his bases by coating it with silver plating. When the werewolf next attacked, it wandered into the citadel and killed one of the Moloids. With his armored suit, Wyndham succeeded in defeating and imprisoning Russoff. Although after witnessing the death of one of their own, the remaining Moloids retreated back to Subterranea. When Russoff reverted back to human form, he explained the situation to Wyndham, who helped keep him contained on future full moons. In 1932, Drew returned after being possessed by the spirit of the Magus, one of Morgan Le Fay's original Darkholders, who betrayed her after their failed attempt to control Chthon. Not to be confused with Adam Warlock's purple counterpart, that's a different guy entirely. Over the following 2.5 decades, Gregor Russoff continued to search for a cure for his lycanthropy. He wrote in his ancestor's diary, transcribing many of the Darkhold's passages, allowing it to effectively serve as a copy of the Book of Sins. But then, in 1958, he was tricked by Chthon into reciting a spell of ascension, nearly summoning the Elder God to Earth. To stop this, the Magus possessed Russoff and forced him to perform the ritual of banishment instead. Chthon tried to interrupt him by striking Russoff down, but the Magus ultimately succeeded in preventing the Elder God from returning. And while this marked the end of Baron Gregor Russoff, the family curse had already been passed on. It manifested again in his son, Gregory, possibly because at some point he also read passages from the Darkhold. However, Gregory's younger brother, Philip, was spared the same fate, and apparently didn't even know the curse existed. At some point, Philip had a relationship with a witch named Laura Maria, but after the two parted ways under unrevealed circumstances, he moved to Los Angeles and anglicized his name from Russoff to Russell, while Laura remained in Eastern Europe and married Gregory. Laura gave Gregory a lunar pendant that allowed him to transform without the light of the moon, and thus retain more control over himself. He used this ability when his wife's coven was attacked by Taboo and a follower of Set named Damballa. That conflict centered around a young Wanda Maximoff, so refer to my video on the Scarlet Witch for more details. After that conflict, Gregory bargained with Taboo and exchanged Darkhold copies, obtaining some missing original pages and returning them to the true book, although he too failed to find a cure. After that, Gregory and Laura settled down to have children of their own, starting with their son, Jacob Russoff. They lived in Gregory's ancestral home in Medeas, Romania, and within 2 years, Laura was pregnant with their daughter, Lissa. Every month on the 3 nights of the full moon, Gregory locked himself in a solitary tower. But then, one fateful night, a lightning bolt struck the side of the tower and released the werewolf. Unable to control himself under the light of the full moon, Russoff ran into the nearby village and murdered a local carpenter. Initially, the townsfolk didn't suspect the Baron, but sought his help due to his years of arcane study. They learned that he too was missing, but the villagers ultimately tracked down the werewolf and killed it with silver bullets, learning the truth when it reverted to human form in death. This revelation turned the townsfolk against the entire Russoff family, and even Gregory's mother, Maria, was stoned and driven out of town. Maria Russoff wandered the forest for several days, but eventually stumbled upon a camp of Romani people who took her in and embraced her as one of their own. Meanwhile, Laura took her children and fled to the United States, reuniting with Philip Russell. The two rekindled their relationship, and within a year they were married, with Laura and her children taking Philip's surname. At 3 years old, Jacob Russoff became Jack Russell, and grew up not knowing the truth of his heritage. But despite never having read from the Darkhold himself, once Jack turned 18, he too fell victim to the family curse, becoming the modern-day werewolf by night. Meanwhile, a committee of corrupt financiers also learned of the Russoff family curse and plotted to blackmail Laura Russell. They contacted Philip and strong-armed him into hiring their enforcer, Max Grant, as a chauffeur. Initially, Philip intended on capitulating to their demands, not wanting his wife's secrets to be exposed, but when he went back on actually paying the blackmail, Max Grant sabotaged the family car, causing Laura to be critically injured in a crash. Jack visited his mother in the hospital, and she revealed the truth of his hereditary curse. Before she passed away from her injuries, she also made Jack promise to never raise a hand against Philip. That same night, when he transformed under the full moon, Jack instinctively tracked down and murdered Max Grant, his werewolf form being influenced by his human desires. Furthermore, when Philip arrived looking for Max so that he could pay the blackmail and protect his children, the werewolf hid, on some level remembering his promise to his mother. For a while, Jack believed that Philip was responsible for his mother's death, but he eventually learned the truth about the committee's involvement. That, of course, was merely the beginning for the Werewolf by Night, but that is all I have for you this week, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. And as always, if there is anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!